All right, so we are Group C, and this is our final project, which focuses on key terms in Chapter 8. So for the first three terms, we're focusing on the three types of conflict. And so there's three types of conflict. They are relationship, task, and process conflict. And the individual types of conflict are important because it leads to a more accurate conflict identification, which helps prompt the conflict resolution if you're able to identify what type of conflict it is.
So the next key concept is going to be a relationship conflict. And in our text, we learn that relationship conflict is personal, defensive, and resentful, also known as that A type of conflict. So that emotional conflict, and an affective conflict, usually rooted in anger or personal friction. So, I have my own personal story that kind of relates to this relationship conflict. And as you see the picture of the Hollywood Tower Hotel, so I work at Disneyland, at the Disneyland Resort in Anaheim, California. And for the beginning of my career at Disney, I worked as a supervisor in attractions, specifically over in the Hollywood area. And one of the attractions that I eventually got moved to was the Hollywood Tower Hotel, or better known as the Tower of Terror. And at the time, it was me and one of my friends that got moved together, and they have it structured so that the supervisors are ranked from, you have three core supervisors, and then everyone else is just kind of a floater supervisor. So anyways, at the time when I got moved, I was the B supervisor, so really like that second person in command, and my friend was the A. And shortly after we'd got moved, she ended up leaving the company, and I'd gotten promoted up to that A spot. And at the time, one of my peers who was in the C supervisor role, he was not promoted. He was left at that C spot, and they actually didn't give us someone to replace me in that B role. So it was me as the A and my peer as the C, and that created a lot of conflict just in itself. But as time went on, I could definitely feel that there was this friction, or at times these personality clashes. We were very different in the way that we approached the leadership of this location. He was definitely the subject matter expert on how the ride worked, and on all of its functions and what to do in case of an emergency, whereas I really focused on just building that really dynamic team and that inclusive environment. So where he definitely had a lot of strength in being the subject matter expert, I know for a fact I was not the subject matter expert at the technical piece of this ride. I really left that up to him, and my job was really to keep the communication alive, make sure that everyone was, having a great time at work, and helping manage all those other supervisors. So as time kind of went on, we definitely had some strong tension, egos getting in the way at times. And it finally, towards the end, right before I got moved away from this attraction to my next location, there was a little bit of a blow up, and a lot was said, and a lot was kind of just came out open into the air. But once he was able to say what he really needed to say, and I was able to express my frustrations, it helped out for a little bit. But I truly feel like one of the best things to happen was leaving that location and just kind of splitting ways. Because really there was never a time where we were able to see eye to eye. And ultimately, I think that was okay, but definitely a great example of how that relationship conflict kind of built up, and all of that tension to eventually blowing up.
Another relationship conflict is also virtual teams. I work in a department where we have a team in Arizona, we have one in Iowa, and we have to work virtually. We never meet in person. Everything that we do is through a chat, like through Skype, or we do conference calls. Even there can be personality clashes. We have very strong personalities on our team. We have one individual that likes to take charge and tell everybody what they're supposed to be doing and not collaborate as a team, which has caused some friction and some problems with our communication and personality clashes, as we have other members that are very strong in personality. It's just a matter of making sure that they get, we get our job done. But this person likes to take over conversations. They like to be the one to tell you what to do and how it's supposed to be done, even if our standard operating procedure does not do it. It is a matter of a trying time when you go to work and you have to deal with this virtually, not seeing the person. But this was just another example of how conflicts can happen on a team, even if it's not face-to-face.
Oh, so task conflict is the second type of conflict in a team. And it surrounds just goals and work that need to be completed, and the conflict that occurs based on what goals and work exist within a team. So it's depersonalized compared to relationship conflict because it doesn't involve people. It involves the work that you have to do in a team. It's because of this depersonalization, it often can lead to creativity because problems are re-engineered and rethought when conflict occurs between team members surrounding those problems and tasks. So I have this little graph here, and it shows that performance and conflict are inversely related to the relationship and process conflicts, whereas the task conflict peaks at a point, which shows that it can promote creativity and increase performance, and it can be beneficial to groups. It's not just conflict, meaning that it's bad. And so my personal life, my professional life, I experienced task conflict at Starbucks where I work when we got a new cleaning chart. And so we are all new to this information, and we're kind of just processing the info and figuring out how to incorporate it into our store and our daily routines and how every day's run there. And so at first we were all kind of rigid and just followed the chart exactly because we didn't really understand it or what it wanted us to do. But different team members would kind of use it as they saw fit, and that kind of led to us all using it in different ways, which wasn't necessarily good. So eventually we realized that we could just rework the chart as a whole to fit into our store. So eventually we just put the majority of the cleaning work on the weekends when we're slower, rather than having to work it all just exactly as the chart suggested. So changing how we did that work and how the task was presented to us eventually helped us be more creative and rethink the problem.
That leads us to the final conflict, which is process conflict. Process conflict centers on disagreements team members have about completing a task, and more specifically focuses on who should be responsible for what in order to complete that task. An example that I have from my professional life is also from Starbucks. We have a large number of tasks that need to be completed on a daily basis to ensure that we are delivering great customer service in an environment that is clean, safe, and ready. At my store, I have a primary opening shift supervisor who opens 5 days a week and a primary closer who closes 5 days a week. They have a scheduled 15-minute pass-off every day to let each other know what is going on and any important information for the next shift. It became very apparent that each of these supervisors has very different styles and priorities while running their shifts. It came to a point where the closing supervisor felt that he had more tasks on his plate than was fair and wanted to reevaluate which tasks were delegated to him versus the opening supervisor's shifts. He felt that he was doing more of the work and that it was not fair. The primary closer stated these concerns and that he wanted things to change. This caused tension between my opener and closer because my opening shift is much busier and she feels she is already at max capacity. My leadership team is now experiencing this process conflict, which is requiring us to reevaluate the way that tasks are delegated going forward.
So this, we have a chart here that talks about the relationship between trust and conflict within a team. So over time, high levels or low levels of trust affect the levels of conflict within a team. So basically what studies have found is that teams with trust are more likely to have a relationship conflict, but they're also more likely to have task-related conflicts, which we know contribute to the creativity and rethinking of problems within a team. So that's positive and negative. However, teams without high levels of trust, especially at the beginning of the team formation, are more likely to have high levels of relationship and task conflict. So they are conflicting on like many different levels, which is negative. So we found that trust creates less conflict, and a lack of trust creates more conflict. And now Frank's going to tell us a little bit about his professional experience with trust and conflict.
Yeah, so I have been, I think fortunate enough to have seen both sides of this. I've worked on a team where, a manager was very hands-on, yes, but to the point of, micromanaging a location, and that in turn led to us feeling like he didn't trust us to do our jobs and trust us to do what needed to get done. And that definitely provided high levels of stress, conflicts within the team, conflicts with us and that manager. But on the flip side, I've also worked on a team where there was definitely a high level of trust. A specific team that jumps out into mind was when opening a brand new attraction at the theme park. The manager that was in charge of this attraction was able to handpick, I think it was a group of 10 of us, and the 10 of us would be the test and adjust crew for this brand new attraction that would unveil at the theme park a year and a half later. So for a year and a half, us group of 10 would have to work closely together and make sure that we were all on the same page getting the work done so that we could open on time, because there was a hard set date already announced to our guests stating that this attraction would open on this specific day. So there was a lot riding on us making sure that we opened on time. So from the very beginning, this specific manager, a different manager that ran this attraction or this location, definitely had a lot of trust in us and knew that we were more than capable of making sure that the work was getting done. Of course, she was checking in on us every once in a while, or just being there and just being around us really helped us as well. But we never were made to feel like we didn't know what we were doing or that we were not to be trusted with this high level information, high levels of project work that obviously we didn't want getting out to our guests or to the general public prior to this specific date. So I definitely can see and have seen the difference between leadership who maybe there isn't that trust there necessarily, and that might lead to some micromanaging, versus a manager who knows that she has handpicked this team to get the job done, and how vital it was for her just to be able to allow herself, I guess, to step back and say, this team, they've got it, and they're going to make it work, and everything's going to be great. So I think some really great examples for this trust tempers negative conflict.
That brings us to the managerial grid, which is an approach to conflict management that describes at least 5 courses of action people can take depending on the person's concern for oneself and for others. Going back to my previous process conflict example regarding my primary opening and closing supervisors, it was very interesting to see how each of them handled it. My closing supervisor is much more concerned with himself and his own shift partners, and avoids any sort of compromise or understanding of how or why the tasks are currently being delegated. My opening supervisor is on the complete opposite spectrum of this grid. She's great at balancing her own needs with the rest of the partners and shifts. In most situations, she is excellent at compromising, while in regards to this specific conflict, she has high concern for both herself and fellow openers, along with having a high concern for the other people involved, which happen to be the closers. Ultimately, she is working to collaborate to create a win-win situation in our environment, but also making sure that all tasks are being completed. It's interesting to see how the different concerns impacts the way that each of them is attempting to solve this problem.
All right, so another type of conflict in teams involves representational gaps, which occur in cross-functional teams. So cross-functional team is usually diverse. There are different members who have different jobs and responsibilities. And so because of this diversity, disagreement on the definition of a task or job often occurs, and this is what the representational gap is, that disagreement on the definition of a task. So when the representational gap exists, the team members are disagreeing about the task. We can see in the chart, the little flow chart, representational leads to task disagreement, and this creates challenges for successfully executing the task. And so in my life at Starbucks, I experienced this we got a new cash management system for everybody, and so this program was introduced to us pretty early on. And we all knew it was coming, like baristas, shifts, managers, district managers, and we're all involved in different levels of operations. So we knew that the program was going to affect all of us differently. And of course, when you hear about like a new way of doing something, you panic and you're like, this is going to be confusing. I'm not going to like this. We were resistant before we even knew what it was, because we created that individual definition of what the task was, which generated the representational gap. And so after like managers and district managers met, they passed that information on to shift supervisors through store meetings. And so then we actually learned how the new system would really affect us as baristas and as shift supervisors at different levels, like on the floor on a daily basis. And so once we were able to agree on the definition, we were able to thoroughly understand how this new program would work. We were able to be all on the same page about the program, and we weren't so fearful about executing it and implementing it in our stores, and we were able to use it effectively and learn how to responsibly manage cash.
And our next slide talks about the different models of disputing. Obviously, we've got the interests, the rights, the power, the different models. And as you can see on the screen, we do have the three different types. But as I was reading, and I won't necessarily read word for word what's on the screen, but as I was kind of reading through these different types of approaches, there wasn't necessarily one specific example that popped into my head as far as something that I could relate to all three of them. Of course, there are times throughout my leadership journey and career that I can definitely pinpoint different times that I did go about making much more interest-based versus rights-based or power-based. And I think for all of us that are in any kind of leadership position, we can pretty much all say that we've been at one of these points at one point or another during our career. And I think that's what we as leaders just need to know how to recognize in ourselves as, what is the best approach for this specific conversation that I'm having, or this specific dispute, or maybe a dispute that two team members are having. Because, although, for example, the last approach, power-based approach, it says characterized by the use of force, intimidation, rank, or power. And when I read that, the first, picture kind of clip art image that popped into my head was, maybe like an army sergeant, yelling at one of his recruits. And of course, that is not the image that I want, my employees or cast members to see in me, but I can definitely recalled several different times where, that power-based approach was the best approach to use at the time because, people were arguing or they were so emotional that there was just no way to get them to stop. And sometimes that power-based approach, although it might not be the most popular or the go-to approach for most leaders, I absolutely can see how that would be used from time to time. But really, overall, I think it's knowing as leaders which approach to use when appropriate.
And this brings us to conflict intervention method. This was designed and distinguished by Wageman and Donenfeld. They were able to come up with 4 different kinds of interventions that team leaders and managers can use to improve the quality of conflict resolution. And as you can see here, there are the 4 listed. In my instance with a virtual team, some of this is difficult to go through as an intervention method. The reason is because you can't see that face-to-face. You can't sit down and have that meeting. To improve the communication, to improve the behavior in team members, one step they can do is the structural design. They can change the team members around, bring on new, remove old, see if that changes the structural design. In my case with a virtual team, that did happen, and for a while it did work with the stronger of us. She did calm down with her communication, but once she felt comfortable with the new members, she started right back up with the taking over, taking charge, telling them what to do, creating scenarios that caused more stress for them trying to onboard, which eliminates other people from wanting to even be on the team because they see this and they hear this going on. The best one that I can come up with out of this intervention method for a virtual team is to actually go through the conflict process coaching and actually do a direct intervention, do some structured debates in the individual, changing the individual, have us debate the issue and go over that. But it is difficult when you come down to it for a virtual team. This does present a lot easier in a face-to-face team. And this does wrap up our discussion going over the Chapter 8, Conflict in Teams, Leveraging Differences to Create Opportunity. Thank you.